And we'll be joined by another person who comes out of a ceramic potting tradition, but also brings tremendous scholarship. In fact, our next presenter, Michelle Erickson, is really nationally and increasingly internationally recognized as someone who has feet in both camps, both amazing work as a contemporary potter, themed to modern events and social messaging, recognized and collected by museums across the country, as well as one of the leading people involved in reconstructing historic ceramic technology. Michelle has been involved in those kinds of efforts with a wide variety of ceramic forms, from everything from early American porcelain production to various earthenwares. And in fact, it shouldn't go unnoticed that during the great anniversary celebration in Jamestown, Virginia, just a few years ago, when Queen Elizabeth II came to be a part of those celebrations, it was Michelle Erickson who was selected by the Commonwealth of Virginia to create the piece of ceramic art that would be the Commonwealth's official gift to her. Michelle has been very involved in the Art and Clay project, and so while Mary has been channeling the Alsts and the Loys and the Albrights, Michelle has been working on channeling Rudolph Christ and how one goes about reconstructing a ceramic squirrel. Michelle Erickson.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. Testing. Okay. You can hear me now? Okay. So, as Robert so eloquently put it, I'm a Moravian poser. I'm not the historian and the culture and the ceramics and the distinction between all the various Moravian ceramics that Mary and other people here are. But I do come at a lot of different ceramic traditions from the objects themselves, and that's kind of where I start with some of the Moravian pieces. And I didn't want to take too long with any kind of slipware, since Mary did such a beautiful job of showing slipware and how some of those processes work. But I thought I would show this because it's such a different type of use of slip than what you saw. Now, before I start on this, I just want you to take note of this piece here on the screen, which is the second thing that I'm going to illustrate. And that's a ring bottle, the so-called faience or tin glazed pieces that were excavated here. They're only, this color of this shape is only known archaeologically. There are no extant examples of this piece, but it's a beautiful and amazing piece of ceramic art. And I do think, as I'll talk about a little bit later when I'm showing it, that it demonstrates the potter's art. And I believe that the potter was very cognizant of this work being, an aesthetic pinnacle of his work. So with that, we can switch from that to just a little different use of slip. Let's see if we, again, I made a earthenware bowl that's kind of set up. Searching. There we go. And so, again, it has a flat bottom. This is probably a little softer than we want it. It has that sort of distinctive rim shape, and it is a kind of a buff-colored earthenware clay, which would actually fire much lighter than it looks right now. But I'm going to take that clay and I'm going to coat it with white slip. And this is not just to give it a background. I'm going to just pour it off right here. Can y'all get that? This is also because the fluid slip that I've left now on the surface of the bowl is going to then help facilitate the pattern of this black ground slip, manganese slip. I'm going to trail out of this 18th century ketchup bottle. And of course, Mary showed the free trailer that flows with the stopper sort of being your thumb closing off the air. I'm going to do an alternate slip here, just a red earthenware made into a slip. My black slip is a red earthenware with manganese added to it to make it a dark brown. And Luke was saying earlier that when they tested the dark brown slips, they found predominantly manganese and iron, because I was wondering if there might be a little cobalt. So now you can see this sort of, I better watch myself and not the video screen. You can see a pattern develop that only does that through using the shape of the bowl, the fluidity of the slip. Where's that shadow coming from? Whoop. And the banding process, a very regular process to create this pretty neat piece. And there's 2 examples of this down in the exhibition. Okay, so with that, that's all the slipware that I'm going to show. And I'm not going to spend too much time either on the ring bottle, other than just to give a sense of the piece. Now, Mary said a lot of things about how everybody does their own thing, their own way, and this is every way that I don't do things. So this is a wheel where she stands up, which I'm not used to doing that, but we're going to try it anyway. And this is a really difficult, ambitious form to do that with. I'm just giving myself an out, just in case. So let's see. So you've kind of gotten a sense of the throwing process, those of you who haven't already. And that ring bottle that was on the screen, and I have an example up on the table here, we had a little bit of help with that since there were so many archaeological examples of that. So I could see the cross-section, could see what Mary described as the interior overlay, which kind of gave some hints into how the piece was made. So some of the things I've worked with, anything from 17th century Italian slipwares excavated at Jamestown to 18th century American porcelain. You don't always have the luxury of seeing a good cross-section of a piece from it being broken in half, but in this case, you do. What I'm doing right now is the piece is basically made up of 3 components. It has the spout at the top, or the neck, which I'm going to throw off the hump of clay. And then I'm going to cut that off. And set that aside. And then it has a foot ring that it sits on. Mary showed a flask that has no foot ring. And so this one's a little different. And it's ovaled out. So just going to throw a little ring of clay with a certain shape. I might throw it a little thicker than I normally would because I'm going to try to get this to stand up wet, which is not what you typically want to do. And again, I'm going to just slice that off, and then I'll pull that into an oval and set that aside. So then I'm going to get into the pot itself. Now this piece, unlike a lot of pots, has a hole in the middle when it's thrown, but that whole ring is going to be turned right side up. So essentially, what I'm going to do is throw a double-walled vessel. Now again, you have to imagine that there are many versions of ring bottles, most of which are not this exquisite. So, and then the fact that these are only known because of archaeological excavation and the research that goes on here with the enormity of this ceramic archaeology, that they're aware of these shapes and forms that would not be known otherwise. And that holds true in many colonial American pottery sites. Those forms tend not to show up extant. So what I just did is I pushed my thumb all the way through to the wheel head, which is not usually what you want to do with a pot, but in this case, it is. I think I kind of like standing up. It's different. I'll regret that, I'm sure. Okay. And then I'm going to start to make this double-walled vessel. So I have kind of a tall, spout-like interior developing. And I'm going to bring that up a fair amount before I start to bring the outside wall up, because as you can see, it'll interfere with trying to throw. Oops. And again, I'm sort of rushing through this a little bit, but because this is a little bit of a meditative type of pot. So it really requires some skill there to get everything lined up in the right place. And if you're, doing it in front of 60 people, then you have other things on your mind. Okay. So let me slow that down a little bit now. And the other thing is the interior of this piece is going to be formed so that the back side is really pretty much a mirror image of the front side. So you're going to see the top, what will be the top of the piece develop on the wheel. And of course the back side of the piece is what's got a flat side on the wheel head. So you have to throw that with enough clay in the right interior contour, so that when you go back and trim the pot like Mary did the flask, you can mirror that image. And these are these examples are very distinctive in that, because they're extraordinarily symmetrical in that sense. I gotta slow this down a little bit. Okay. So now you're starting to get the idea, but it doesn't look much like a ring yet. And you also can see there's some pretty heavy finger rings or finger marks in the piece from my hands thinning the clay out. That's the other thing that was very distinctive about this piece. It's very even and thinly potted. Part of that can have to do with the fact that what's normally the bottom of the pot that carries the most of the weight ends up getting trimmed off, because it's going to end up being one side of the piece instead of the bottom. I'm just taking a wooden rib and smoothing out those finger rings to some extent. And I'm going to start to kind of camphor that clay in somewhat. And this is where you don't want a lot of friction between these two pieces of clay joining together. I'm just bringing that out And I'm going to, oops, screw it up. Now I'm going to overlap it and kind of try to trap the air to start to create that shape. Now it looks kind of like a tall, different version of what I showed, but as Mary pointed out with the flask, is once you trap that air, you can use that to your advantage to shape the piece. And I normally make sure that I have all the clay kind of in the right place. I may not have had as much breadth in the body of the piece as I wanted, but I think, it'll be enough to give the idea. And again, you don't want to release the air from that until you've really been able to finish and refine the shape. And the other reason I'm showing this form is this is, as I said, this piece is a potter's art. It's a very potterly object. It takes a master craftsman to create that shape with all those various attributes. And it doesn't have to necessarily be as refined as this piece is, but it's not a modeler. In other words, it's not a modeler's art, a mold maker's art, a carver's art. It's a potter's art. And so I'm showing this really in contrast to this sort of menagerie of figural bottles that I'm going to touch on here in a little bit. And I also think I'm going to try to just make the base look rounder because we're not going to trim it on the wheel. See if we can approximate that somewhat. You can see these tools are pretty simplistic shapes. There's lots of nice tools in the collection. Ribs or chips, as Mary calls them, with profiles cut into it, so they would throw a cup or a bowl right into the rib template, which created a lot very sharp and now at some point this will probably break off of the wheel, so I don't want to go too far. But let's see. So now it's starting to look a little bit more like the finished piece. And of course, water gets trapped not only on the inside, which you can get out. The hole in this is a little wider than those, so that's usually I make a tool to reach with a sponge down in there and get that water out. But also the water can collect on the interior of the pot. Now, when Mary was saying something about she didn't know what they did without plastic, I don't know what they did without these sort of flexible ribs for this form, because they really help contour the piece. There may have been a rib actually that, although I tend not to think so, because you would see some evidence in chattering on that. But at any rate, let me see if I can find my towel. Basically have a big donut. And I'm just going to cut that off of the wheel. And you can see the front side, but you can also see that flat back side, which would have to be trimmed. It's very difficult to do that all the way. Now that has to be put on this tiny, dainty little foot, which I usually do first, and normally I would score it and but we're just really makeshifting. Just want to center it. It's an ovaled shape. And the reason I put the foot on first is so that you can set it on there. And it might go backwards a little. Yeah, it's going to be too heavy to then do the spout. So again, once you've got your foot, you want to use that to center and cut the spout out, the hole for the bottle top, and there you go. And as long as you don't set it down, it's fine. Okay. Woo. We'll leave it this way for now. Okay. So that really kind of leads into, let me see if I've got a spot I can.
So you would not trim that backside on the wheel, you would just freehand?
Oh, no, I would trim it on the wheel. I would do the whole thing, let it set up. Then I actually have what I call a little chuck-type bowl that would mirror this other surface so it doesn't flatten out when you're trimming it, and trim all that down. And usually I pre-throw one, but this wasn't really the focus of my talk today, so we're just doing that. I'm really doing it to illustrate two different ways of getting at what seem like similar vessels in terms of their function, and but have very, very different aesthetic to them. So I'm going to go from that. That's probably going to be, let me see. Is this in your way? No. Yes. Oh. Okay. Yeah, I've got one right here, I think. So, let's see if is that better? Yeah. Okay. So, that is one version of a flask-type bottle. Oops, sorry, I lost my clay. Oh, here it is. Okay. And I have a sort of a finished example of a squirrel bottle here, and you guys have seen that downstairs as well. So we'll start backwards, and you're starting off with something like that. And they have a number of molds here at Mazda. They have, a lot of the early plaster molds, which is a great resource. And they have some with the actual pieces that must have, come out of the molds as illustrated in the articles and many articles in the journal. But before you have a mold of something, you have to have the thing to take the mold of. And so that's kind of where you have to say, well, how, what was the model that they took the mold from to create these things in clay? And was the model even made out of clay? It occurred to me that with all the baking and confections and things that they probably made here, there could have been some kind of culinary molds that they were using. You can see this as a very stylized depiction of a squirrel. It's not, even though it has so much character of a natural squirrel, it doesn't really follow the European models, the Meissen and other animal imagery contemporary to it. And those were sculptural. They didn't have this hole in the top. But the hole in the top is deceptive. Makes you think it's a flask, but it's not particularly functional. They're not glazed on the inside. So it's a little bit of a mystery. So I'm going to start with some clay. I decided that these are really potterly people, and so it's not too far-fetched to assume that they may have gotten at these vessels by using their potter's art to get there. And so I do that myself with a lot of my sculptural work. And I start off with basically a pot. So that gives you kind of an even, centered, even thickness of clay to get your symmetry set up. And it's very forgiving and easily sometimes not so easily, but it's easy to rectify as clay if you're carving that as wood or in some other kind of medium. You know, you have less control over it. And then the most indicative thing has to do with all the embellishments on the piece, which are definitely conducive to clay methodology. So this time I'm not gonna go all the way through the pot. I'm gonna stop short, and I'm not gonna create a real thin pot because this is the model. This is a mold model. And so you want that to be able to be manipulated and formed. And you don't want to have a lot of thin spots and weak spots. And I know you guys have seen a lot of pots thrown today, so I won't spend too much more time on that. Let's see. And again, you want to get the water out. So I'm going to start with a cylinder. Just pull the clay up. And I'm keeping it somewhat narrow because that's where I want to end up. Sorry, did I get you? No, almost. And it is incredible to see all these original vessels in one spot on display at one time. I think the exhibition is really exciting, and all the research and all the different disciplines, including mine and Mary's, it's very exciting to see institutions pulling all those things together to tell the real story and not just one part of the story. And so I think that Mesda and Chipstone and Ceramics in America and Luke and Rob should be commended for their constant challenging of material that's out there, not to upstage it, but to bring it further, because there's so much we don't know, and that's the exciting part. So you can see I'm sort of getting a shape here, and it doesn't look like a whole lot. It looks like a cylinder. I'm going to start to slow this thing down. There we go. I'm going to start to give it a little bit of shape. And also kind of smooth out the surface. And again, which is kind of interesting because you do see that with the ring bottle, I'm going to do something that is similar. I'm going to take the form itself and eventually close off the air so that I can use that pressure, that resistance. So here you even have a technique in forming that is illustrated in another vessel. I'm just going to close off the top like that. And then I can start to shape the piece a little bit more. Now this looks more like one of those Russian dolls that you fit one inside the other or maybe a strange bowling pin. So, and obviously that's not a cylindrical form. So something's got to happen between here and there. But that really is the starting point. Now I wanted to just get a little bit more narrow in the base here. So usually when I throw, I have, especially something like this, I have continuous control over the speed with my foot, so I don't even think about it. So the sort of one speed till you adjust it with your hand is different experience. All right. Okay. So, there's your squirrel bottle, except it doesn't really look like one yet. But I'm going to start to give it some shape. And get some beginning going there. Now, you can see he's kind of fat and lopsided. But, aren't we all really? And he needs a little bit of definition. So over a course of steps, let's see if I can, I'm going to take a triangle shape, and I'm going to cut that out to start to give him a more narrow shape. Now, this is still pretty wet. I would be waiting so that I could use more force and not just be smushing his shape too much. But again, basically all this part of the squirrel is done by hand at this stage. I'm just kind of getting, I'll pick that up later and really whack in the bottom, do some things like that. I'm going to do the same thing to the back. I think I did that. So far, in the last couple weeks, I've demonstrated 18th century Staffordshire slipware, 17th century Italian slipware, 15th century, 16th century Palissy, and it's all kind of running together in a big. But it's amazing the connections between these methodologies globally, and so. But they each have an idiosyncratic. So this slipware technique you also see on Yorktown dishes that are excavated down the street from where our shop, Period Designs, used to be. Now, you can tell that he needs a tail as well. And the slipware technique that's on this bowl in 1720 was being used on these very rare and unusual patterns being made in Yorktown, Virginia in 1720, and they don't exist above ground. So the only reason anybody knows about them is through archaeological research. Now you can see how it kind of caved in there because it's a little too wet. You want it to have a little bit more firmness. And also, this needs a piece added so that you can start to get to the tail section of the squirrel. So I'm just taking a little wad of clay starting to again, keeping in mind the characteristics of the piece, all these things about how does the tail come into the head, what's the curve like, you know, the person who made this the first time, they weren't necessarily trying to mimic another thing, but maybe they were. And so you can see these things stylistically. And I think that they matter because when you try to get that specific thing is when you start to really learn something about the original source. So now you're starting to get a little bit of a squirrel going, kind of an oversized head. And, you know, again, a very roughed out version. Now, you might notice, and of course, he needs these sort of haunches for the leg and what will become the sort of shoulder of the squirrel. And you'll notice he doesn't have any arms. So we'll get to that in a minute, but this piece will be made with no appendages because it has to be molded. And once it's molded, then the appendages are added. Okay. So all those components have to be made separately. And when the air, I noticed after I'd been working on this for a bit that it wasn't sealed up in front. So what happened is the air was escaping. Oh, it's still escaping. So why don't we'll just, and sometimes I'll just seal it off good and then blow it back up so that I can seal it back off and get back to where I need it to go. Yuck. Yeah, no toxic chemicals in the clay studio ever. Okay. So now you can see this is a long way from being where we want to go. And I did forget one or two tools, but I'm going to bring a couple tools over here just because I think it'll be easier to see. Let's see here. Where'd they go? So one thing that is very distinctive are the eye of the piece, and that's not really a modeled thing. It's an incised thing or an engraved thing or simply carved in. So if you can see, this little piece of plaster has just a very simplistic shape carved into it. But without that detail, you really cannot build up anything from a sculptural standpoint on the clay that gives you the same type of impression. So I'm just going to take a little dab of clay here. Now you can see that's, you know, there's a sculpted eye, not very interesting. But you could get much more defined. It doesn't matter how much you do, it's not going to have the look that the original pieces have. So I'm going to take this sprig, oh, I don't remember which side's up, and I'm going to push that into the clay, and then we have a very nice, gentle little squirrel eye going there. That's very expressive. Or he might be cockeyed, I really don't know. His tail is definitely having some trouble. So that's some of the things that, yes, that's very nice for me to illustrate it here, but I don't have a clue into that until I go and do it to see how that works. I happen to be good at modeling, so it's not restrictive for me to try to create that from a modeling perspective. Maybe we should just turn him to the other side. I don't know if that's any better. But that's just not how it was done. And certainly you could get a lot more use out of the tool that you made to make other animals and create the eye for other models and that type of thing. So we'll do. And then sometimes I also use, now again, see this is wet, so it's pushing into it more than I want and all that type of thing. You can also use part of that eye to give you the nose, okay? And that's just, you know, one of those things, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense, but, and they have kind of just a very simple mouth. I'm not looking at a picture right now, and none of this is very correct. Oh, the other thing, and you can see that they indicated on the models is a little notch for the ear, so that when they go to create the piece, I think so they don't forget to put the ear on, but also so that it has an indentation so that when you add the little ear later, it gives it a lot more depth and interest. So you still have a few more elements, and we're probably not going to get to show one very well. Normally, oh, I should get that, I don't know what I did with it. I have a roulette, which is basically like a pie crimper, a wheel. It's usually a brass piece, or it can be made out of ceramic. It can be thrown on a wheel like a little cylinder with a hole in it. And it can have a design carved into it, and when you roll it into the clay, it creates a pattern in relief, or could create it in indentation, just depends. And I'm going to do a real kind of crude version of that because I forgot my roulette. I quickly carved out something, and I'll show you. Somebody made me a little roulette today, and I wanted to thank him. I don't even know who it was. I don't know if it'll work, but we'll try it. So I'm taking this sort of raised piece of clay, and again, I'm exaggerating it for the point of illustration. All of this is very, very, when I do that to recreate a piece, it's all very tightly organized in terms of trying to get it as close in character and relief and scale and all kinds of things to the original as I can. And again, I should tell you that these things will shrink 10%. So when I'm working with any of these things, I have to take, and Mary, anybody who's making pots takes that into account as well. Let's see if I can find the thing that he made. Oh, too bad. Oh, here it is. So just for those of you who don't know what a roulette is, he just did this without knowing, and the beading might be a little far apart, and also wood can sometimes stick to clay, so I don't even know if it'll work. Let me see before yeah, and it's not going to show as much of the relief. So, but essentially, this, when it's firmer, I would run this roulette up the tail to give it that pattern. Can you see that? So let me try it one more time a little deeper and see what it... So you can kind of see the impression there. And I had carved something that probably wouldn't work much better, so I think that shows that sufficiently. And then you also have with these pieces an incising to create sort of the feathering of the tail. And I just do that with a sort of a repoussé tool. Oh, how does the tail feathering go? I forget now. It would go away from the source like that. So you have these lines that go into the body. So again, all this embellishment is done before the mold is taken. And that's not a known necessarily either. And in fact, it's been a long time since we looked at all the artifacts, but I do think I saw some evidence of where they try to retool it a little bit if it just didn't really have enough character. The molds get worn down over time, and they start to lose some of the definition. So then you see some hand tooling come back into the piece after it's been press molded. So he ain't beautiful, but he's mine. So that's, I just really wanted to give you a sense of taking a step back. Oh yeah, those were mold made. Well, what did they take the mold of? And that's true in many, instances of period ceramics. The modeling and the model making for especially a lot of these elaborate 18th century teapots, when they stop going from the potter's art to the modeler and the mold maker's art, there's all these composites of different trades coming together. So you have engraving, you have roulettes, you have all kinds of, sort of like Mr. Potato Head, and putting all these different things on to create these embellished surfaces and shapes and so forth. So once you've done all that, you end up with something. Let's see if you can catch up with me. I'm going to stick over here now. Okay. You end up with something like this. Now, he's still armless and legless. You can see the eye. There's a very distinctive definition where those things end, and the rouletting and all that. This is bisque-fired just so that it wouldn't chip or deteriorate too much, so I could carry it around if I need to show that. But when I then set up what I modeled to take a mold from, it would have been basically leather hard. So it would have been clay that was not completely dry, but very firm. And I would set that up. That's very well illustrated in the journal. We don't want to talk too much about how to make a mold, but this is a basic two-part mold. And it's, this is the plaster negative. And I can move these. Of the positive. So essentially, you would create a barrier to hold your plaster around the model, part it halfway, pour the top so that you have the top mold, and then reverse all that, turn it upside down to pour the other side. You don't have to get that right now. It's simple, but it's illustrated in the journal. Actually, it's not simple. It's one of my real Achilles heels is mold making. I don't like it very much, but I end up doing it a lot. So then, this mold has some ways to go before it becomes what it needs to be. And before I do the larger piece, I want to do a little bit with the other components. So again, I failed to remember to do that, but this is the base of the piece, a foot mold. You can see the little claws in the front. And this is the base that the piece sits on. Again, I threw it on the wheel, cut out a piece from the center to oval it out, and then I actually created, again, a negative plaster just to create the shape of the feet, because you could just tool them and they didn't have the right character. So this is the negative of this positive. Again, this has been bisqued, but I have this still in the setup it was in. So I would have just poured the plaster into this clay. All this was clay, and this probably fits, you know, right in there. This has been bisqued, so it shrank a little bit. And there's your negative. So I'm going to go ahead and push the clay into that. I'm going to make it a little bit thick, just so it'll hopefully hold the weight of the piece, since we're doing it all at one time. And I'm just putting this clay, which is a local clay that I use when I've made a couple of these squirrels. They mostly have a little bit of an edge to them in terms of a contemporary aspect. And we'll show that a little bit more later. But this clay is a real pretty yellow buff color when it's fired. And it has a pretty fine grit or tooth to it. And I can leave some if anybody, you know, wants to feel it up here. But that will fire to a pretty white color, yellowish white. So I'm so used to trying to make things the right thickness, I forgot that I wanted to make this thicker. Okay. All right. So I just want to do that a little bit ahead of time, let that set up, and I'm going to pull it kind of away from, away from the rim. Now the plaster absorbs the moisture out of the clay, and so in a pretty quick period of time, it can set up fairly well. And I did the same thing for the little hands, or paws, or whatever you might call them. And these I do more like a coil, push that coil in and leave a little bit of that thickness to the arm and taper that off. So these are all the little components that, and they have a really neat hand mold for one of these squirrels or one of the little woodland animal forms. Is that on display? No, but it is in the journal. Okay. So now that we've got the hands and you can see, I've already put clay in one side of, well, I don't know if you can see that yet, but let's see. Can you get up higher on this? Oh. So not too much, huh? Well, again, you can see, I'm just going to take the clay and basically start from the center and push the clay into all the recesses of the mold. I'm going to cut off the excess, but I want to get it pushed in with some force so it'll pick up all the definition. And I would usually wash my hands clean of all this crumbly clay that's on it, because you don't necessarily want that interfering with things. And then what I'm going to do is kind of rearrange the distribution of the clay within the mold after I punch it out a little bit. Now, at the time that we were looking at these bottles and I was trying to figure out how they were done, not only how the original model was made, but how they were cast in these molds. They had these spouts, or these holes at the top. It's possible to pour slip into these molds and cast them, but it's very difficult, and especially the amount of body that the clay body has to it, the amount of tooth to it. I used a very fine porcelain to try to pour into a mold that they had, and it just really took forever to get it in there. And then when you wanted to pour it out, when you slip cast, again, the plaster sucks the moisture out of the clay, and in slip casting, it leaves a very thin, even coating on the plaster of clay, of fine slip. So it would stop up the little spout, which is not very big, to do that. So then I tried throwing a slab of clay in there. That worked okay, but didn't really seem right. And I think I actually have come to the conclusion that it was clay. This clay is pretty soft, and it's also very toothy. And so I can kind of work it in to all the recesses, and it's not really a very solid, stiff clay, but I think it was even probably less than that. I think it was more like a slurry, a really, really thick slurry. But that's conjecture on my part. It just has that feel to it, and I think just the different elements, one of which is the seams. I could feel inside of one of the original bottles, and in a slip cast version, the seam on the interior would follow the exterior. So at the seam, it would go like this towards the outside. In these bottles, there was this little roll of what felt like kind of uniform clay to the inside. So that indicated that it was not only not slip, but something was causing that sort of uniform bead of clay on the interior seam. Okay. So let me see. So now you have this sort of negative inside of half of one of the bottles. And there was also swipe marks on the inside, which you would not see necessarily on a slip cast bottle, because it would be cast and you'd take it out whole. These look like they were prepared and then put together. So all those things coming together, kind of dictated that. And again, I'm sort of saying it now, but I didn't really know that. And one of the things that I've learned in trying to rediscover some of these early techniques or understand them is not to kind of preclude something before you've really gotten into it. And it's very difficult to not make assumptions just based on your own experience of how you would do it or how you think something like that is done. And you really have to sort of almost think of the most far-fetched thing to keep yourself from falling into the trap of making assumptions too early on. So now that that's kind of prepared, this one I've had sitting in the mold for a while. It's kind of hard. The other side is pretty soft. And And now if this was more of a slurry, it would be somewhat faster. You'd probably fill it up. They probably would drain off some and smooth it out. And not be messing with the thickness. Because one thing about the thickness is where those haunches are. If you're slip casting, the thickness will automatically be equal all over. When you're press molding, that's not the case. So you can end up with really thin spots and really thick spots if you don't really know your form. And in the case of the Bonnet and Morris pickle dishes with the shells, it was the exact opposite. That told us that they had to be slip cast because when you tried to press mold them, the thin spots would crack on the shell, which was very fine. So now what I'm doing is just running a bead of slip kind of along the interior of that edge. And you don't want to get it too close so it'll stick to the edge of the plaster and make it harder to release. Again, these things, I would do this and let it set up. For a little while before trying to demold them. We're going to go ahead and just try to do all that. So then you're going to take the two sides and try to get that really together good. Now I think that these little holes actually provided some leverage for the prying the two molds apart, but I'm not 100% sure about that because I think at least for the most part, that little spout could be added to some extent. I mean, it's there, but now. So now we have the scroll mold sort of pushed together. I'm going to take the little hands out so you can see your little paws, and then it still feels kind of soft, but and sometimes the best way of getting these things out of these little sprig molds is to just take a piece of clay to lift it away. Okay? So, you can see that. Okay. So there's this little feet. Now, before I try to take that out, I wanted to just talk a little bit about a couple of other methods that they used for these figural bottles, or these animal bottles. So as you can see, this is a very abstracted, designed, pottery type of way of getting at this animal form. Another thing that they did was cast from life. So in the case of one of the turtle bottles, they used an actual turtle shell and took a plaster mold of that piece, and you can see the indications of that on the mold and on the extant, was that piece archaeological or was that extant? Okay. On the existing antique. And I think also there's indications of the bottom of it as well. So I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Johanna, but I just wanted to, not without going through the whole process of making one of those, illustrate that process. You can see that this is the bottom of the, and you can kind of see the mirroring of the sections of the shell, the plates of the shell. And then, of course, in the top, if I can get out of the way of the shadow, you can start to see, yeah, some of the shadow of the shell. So that's a different way at getting at one of these forms, a life cast form. And again, then the feet and the hands and the other elements would have to be added. These you probably have to come up and take a look because it's just not enough, the right kind of light apparently to catch that. So let's see there. But they also would have to have different things done to the form. A head had to be thrown and articulated and added, and the feet, and that type of thing. So let's see if this will. Oops. Uh-oh. Well, for better or worse. Yay. And there he is. Okay. So there is the squirrel, and if I could get out of the light of it, can you, oops. So, okay. So now, our little squirrel, he looks a lot better than his country cousin over there. And you can see that the side that I'm holding towards myself is the side that's had time to dry, and it has a little bit more sharpness if you don't disturb the thing while it's setting up. And then also, I do come back on these and finish the tops actually on the wheels. So, but in addition to that, he needs to have his base. I'm having a little issue here with my mic. And I'm going to just and this is basically a thinned down version of the same clay, this local clay. So it has a fair amount of tooth to it. And we want to line them up with the paws there. Hold on. And then, and you notice this, this sort of seam here, which has to also be fine. So then I'm going to take the little hands and again, I've kind of modeled the body of the squirrel so that those will fit in at an angle and kind of go in towards the center. Just using the slip to trying to stay out of the light here. Now, we can't let our squirrel go empty-handed. So we're going to have to give him something to hold on to for dear life. And I think part of the interest in these objects to me, and as Robert said, I do, a lot of this work that I do influences my contemporary work as a ceramic artist or an artist working in clay, because I feel like ceramic history is such a unique window into our past human experience, and yet it has a very timeless and universal appeal to it. So from my perspective, it actually makes more sense for me if I'm using clay to reference ceramic history and pieces that were made at a time when clay had relevance as vessels in our lives that were other than our bathroom fixtures or space shuttle tiles. So that's part of what I think helps me sort of put this work in a context that is very relevant in the 21st century. It's like, why does it matter how this thing was made and who made it, and to a large segment of society it does not matter. But I do think it's because they don't understand, they're not exposed to it and they don't understand it, not because it's not relevant. So it would have been easier just to do a nut, I think. But at the same time, it is a little nuts. Now I also okay. So every squirrel needs an AK-47. So there he is.